Welcome back everyone, and today I'll be going through how to fight against werewolves. You've probably already seen firsthand how strong they are now, but they do have some glaring weaknesses which can be exploited. I recommend checking out my guides on werewolf as well, even if you don't play one, because understanding how werewolves work in PvP will let you know how to fight them better. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, before we start, let's understand what makes werewolf so overpowered and what to avoid doing against them. Werewolf is without doubt the strongest brawler in the game right now. They have both very high offensive pressure and very high offensive healing, which means that they heal a lot from just attacking. They also have crazy sustain. All their stamina skills cost very little, and while their main heal is somewhat expensive, it is also their only magica costing skill. Good werewolf builds also have extremely high health, often over 45k, while still keeping their insane damage. So that being said, you should avoid fighting a werewolf head on in a melee engagement. Chances are they will outdamage, outheal, and outsustain you. Werewolf also has an inbuilt detection skill, so never rely on cloak or invisibility as your defense. Werewolf also dishes out an insane number of hits every second. Many of them, such as the Dire Wolf's attack, can be blocked. So, do not block against a werewolf if you are not built for it. Your stam will be rapidly drained. Werewolf also has some pretty strong scaling execute skills, such as Feral Carnage, Rip and Tear, and Static Reverberation if they are a sorcerer. So, although this advice may sound obvious and generic, avoid staying at low HP versus a werewolf. You will just give them more pressure. Hearing all this, the obvious solution seems to be just kite them. And you are right, but I'll be explaining how to kite the smart way to take maximum advantage of some very specific werewolf weaknesses. And this will work even if you're a melee build. Werewolf gets a lot of their offensive healing from Rip and Tear, a very stack spammable that gives massive healing on top of good damage and debuffs. They also have Blood Claws, an AoE skill that applies a 6-second damage over time that heals them, and Feral Carnage, a 10-second damage over time that scales heavily with Execute. The werewolf's entire game plan is to keep both dots up, pass on you with Rip and Tear, and stun you with Fear whenever they can. Kiting makes it very difficult for them to continuously cast these skills on you, especially Rip and Tear, since they will have to first reapply their dots to remain effective. Blood Claws is particularly annoying since it only lasts 6 seconds, so it's quite hard for them to keep it up. Kiting is particularly effective if you are ranged or running lots of damage over times, because if they cannot heal by attacking you, they are instead forced to cast or even spam their burst heal to keep alive. They are also constantly forced to catch up with you first before they can resume pressuring you. Werewolves with lower skill or bad builds can easily run out of mag this way, leaving them completely out of healing options. Werewolf also has no snare remover, making snares extremely annoying for them to deal with while being kited. I do not recommend using immobilizers on them, since they can still dodge throw endlessly to remove any roots. Now I want to draw particular attention to the Blood Claw skill. Frankly, it is an extremely hard skill to land. It only has a small 7-meter range cone, which is made way worse by the large size of the werewolf model, which obstructs it. Consistently landing Blood Claws is a major challenge for werewolf players, and you can make it even harder for them by having high movement speed and unpredictable movements. Another very annoying thing you can do is to constantly move in and out of melee range, which can easily disrupt their melee skills, especially Feral Carnage. Because the way the skill works, it will change to become a gap closer if the enemy is more than 7 meters away, and the gap closer is pretty harmless by itself. So if you happen to move out of range just as they are about to cast Feral Carnage, their skill will either cancel itself or it will be converted to pounce, which is a huge waste of time for them. It can work the opposite way as well. The pounce skill is very awkward to use, and the werewolf will freeze in place for a split second before pouncing, and also right after their pounce land, and they are vulnerable in both phases. So the technique when fighting them, especially if you are a melee build, is to try to remain at the boundary of the melee range, which is 7 meters, and constantly exit and enter it on your own terms. And that will cause severe disruption to the casting of their skills, especially Feral Carnage. Utilizing line of sight, such as running around a tree or wall, is also extremely effective against werewolves. Because not only are you making their melee skills harder to land, you can even disrupt their fear. The werewolf fear has an enormous 10-meter radius, so normally it's impossible to avoid, but it cannot go through obstacles and it has a 0.3-second cast time. This cast time is crucial. If you are making tight turns around corners with high movement speed, the cast time can make it very hard for the fear to land on you, especially since the werewolves themselves cannot sprint when channeling the fear. Sometimes the best thing to do is just to avoid fighting them. It seems hard to outrun a werewolf. After all, they have more movement speed and a gap closer, but they are still limited by the same move speed cap. They do not have a snare or root, and they lack snare removers. Most builds with some form of inbuilt speed can easily outrun werewolves. Now, they do have a gap closer, but as mentioned before, it is clunky to use. Werewolves will freeze in place before they cast pounce and after they land, slowing them down greatly. The short delay after the pounce lands means you will already be out of melee range before they can even attack, forcing them to catch up again. Pounce is also terrible on uneven terrain. It will often bug out and fail to cast. If they are spamming pounce on you to catch up, all it takes is just one pounce to not cast, and they will be left behind. That being said, the best way to escape a werewolf is to have major expedition and some movement speed, like medium armor or swift, and just sprint up a hill. Pounce will often fail uphill. Even if the werewolf does manage to stay on you, they can never start doing any appreciable damage as long as you keep moving. If you haven't played Reworked Werewolf, chances are you don't know what Rampage is. Simply put, it is a very powerful werewolf mechanic, overlooked by most people, including werewolf players themselves, and knowing how to play against it is very important. Rampage is pretty much Werewolf's ultimate, and activating it grants the following for 20 seconds. 15% damage done, 20% movement speed, and all their abilities are free. It also gives 4k HP recovery if they're on the pack leader morph, which is what most people will be on. You can tell when Rampage is up either by using a buff tracker or by glowing patterns on the werewolf's body. Because of these insane buffs, it is highly advisable to disengage and focus on kiting and staying alive when the werewolf has Rampage up. Treat Rampage how you would treat someone with corrosive armor. Do not try to kill them through Rampage, since they will quite literally have infinite heals, more damage, and usually more HP regen. Werewolves gain access to Rampage Ultimate after they stack enough Fury, which is increased every time they cast a skill. This is another reason why kiting them is so important. The less often they cast skills, the slower they build Fury, and the lower their Rampage uptime. For example, when I duel on Werewolf, I can often get a 50 to 60% uptime on Rampage since I'm always on the offense and spamming skills. But when outnumbered and 1vxing, my uptime on Rampage is only about 30% since I spend a lot more time moving, rolling, and etc. After Rampage expires, it takes anywhere from between 20 seconds to a minute for it to be available again, depending on how often they cast. And this is your best window to fight back. Let's face the hard truth. Even the best player in ESO on a good build will struggle against a highly skilled and properly built werewolf. But wolves with bad builds can be pretty easy to fight. The easiest tell is their max HP. A good werewolf will often have around 40 to 50k health, since this is optimal for their healing. If you see a werewolf below 40k, then there's a good chance they are not hard to kill. And if they are below 30k, they probably have no idea what they're even doing. Likewise if they are using the channeled morph of Blood Claws. Another good way is to look at which morph of werewolf they choose. I've explained more in my guides, but Pack Leader is by far the superior morph, and it is what you're going to encounter the most. You can identify it by the two dire wolf pads or its default white colored fur. Berserker is the damage morph, but it is suboptimal in PvP, being way squishier just for a small damage increase. If they are a Berserker, there's a high chance they are not in a good build and will be easy to kill. Another thing you can do against Berserker werewolves, provided they are not grouped with other wolves, is to run them out of their werewolf. Staying in werewolf form on Berserker is near impossible, especially if they are not spamming attacks. So by kiting them, you will eventually force them out of werewolf form. This section is more for the advanced players, but basically there are really only two classes of werewolves to worry about, Sorcerer and Warden. There are some that work well too, like subclass or DK werewolf, but the vast majority of the ones you face will be Sorcerer and Werewolf. And Sorcerer is much more common, since it is the best overall class for Werewolf. Warden Werewolf, however, or as I would like to call them, Wardens, will be your main concern. Simply put, it has far greater damage than Sock Werewolf, and while they are rarer, chances are any Wardens you meet will be someone who knows what they are doing and is running a min-max status effect build. Wardens are usually capable of dishing out 7 to 10k DPS, while having over 45k health. But without conservation of energy passive from Sorcerer, it can be hard to sustain and heal on them when under heavy pressure. And I've personally seen many players who are good at Sorcerer Werewolf struggle on Warden. For that matter, kiting is especially effective versus Wardens, since it will be much easier to run them out than a Sock Werewolf. Sock Werewolf deals much less damage, but they will have much better healing and sustain. You can identify Wardens easily, since they will usually use the Ares Cry set, which has a loud and visible proc, or you can use an add-on to see their minor toughness buff. When fighting a werewolf who is part of a group, keep this very important thing in mind. Werewolves have no way of healing their teammates. They cannot share their heals. So sometimes the correct thing to do is to focus the non-werewolves, since the werewolves themselves will be unable to heal and save them. This fight is a perfect example of that. Likewise, if you're in a group fighting a group of werewolves, choose the squishiest werewolf and focus him. The others will not be able to heal him. I found the hardest people to kill to be the ones who run Mara's Palm or Weird Tree on top of the cleanse CP, giving them 2 rotating full cleansers, which are good because most werewolves run a lot of status effects and it will remove them on top of their dots, essentially resetting the fight every single time. This is particularly effective against Warden werewolves because then you will also remove a lot of their additional damage done. But a word of warning, you still need somewhat decent resist and healing on top of the cleansers. Otherwise, you will die during the downtime. Essentially, you just need to survive until either one of your cleansers are ready. The downside of running a cleanse set is that you often will have insufficient damage to kill the werewolf, but at least you will be able to stalemate. Just having the cleanse CP works as well, but the downtime is quite long, and again, you have to be able to survive it. And the proc condition requires low HP, which can be risky given that werewolf does have strong executes. Shared Pain is also a particularly strong set, since werewolves have so many dots. I've fought builds where the set deals 20 to 30% of their total damage, and also reduces dot damage by 8%. It is honestly one of the sets I struggled with the most on Werewolf, and I do consider Shared Pain to be a hard counter. Gerald Mountains is also very good if they are not running clans, but make sure you can survive yourself with the 15% healing debuff. Werewolf also doesn't have good crit chance and crit damage, so don't bother stacking crit resist against them. As for specific builds, so far I've really only encountered 3 types that are somewhat effective at both surviving and killing werewolves. 2 are DK builds and 1 is Sorcerer. DK and Sock are definitely the best against werewolves now, since both have insane sustain and healing which are needed to survive werewolf. Now, I don't have time to make and show specific setups for all 3, but I'll cover their general ideas. For DK, the first build type is a high pressure dot build. Werewolves do not have good resistance, and a strong pressure DK can easily go toe to toe and do over 7k DPS on them. And yes, while a good werewolf will have no problem surviving that, if they get careless and drop to half HP, the DK still has enough burst to kill them, since a DK spec into dots will still have access to Whip, Heart and Flame, and Incinerate, all of which can be combined for a decent burst. Dawnbreaker is particularly strong on this setup since it hits harder on Werewolf and lands more reliably than Leap, especially if you are using Shattering Rocks. Another DK build is a pure burst build using Onslaught and Whip to one-shot them, and this can work quite well if they are below 40k health or if they get caught off guard. For Sorcerer, the best build right now seems to be kite builds that utilize status effects with the new mythic, since Bound Armaments go really well with it, and you can dish out high pressure while still constantly kiting. So that's all for now, and I hope you learned something new. I might make a specific build to counter werewolves in the future, most likely it will be on a DK. Also, I think with upcoming reworks, there will be a lot more options to counter werewolf. But for now, all this seems to be the best options available. Do leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time.